The crystalline spires of the Zapirian command nexus pulsed with subdued blue-green light, their translucent surfaces humming with the quiet tension of impending doom. High Commander Zakel stood motionless before the holographic display, his chitinous fingers tracing the flickering projections of enemy fleet movements. The data streams painted a grim picture, wave after wave of the Krixis armada, their blackened hulls blotting out entire star systems as they advanced. The war was lost. The Zapirian dominion, for all its bioluminescent splendor and elegant technology, had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and now stood on the precipice of annihilation. Behind him, scientist Cast Quilex adjusted the crystalline nodes, embedded in his cranial crest, his faceted eyes reflecting the dim glow of the tactical display. The numbers were irrefutable, even with their last defensive fleet, even with the resonance cannons of the homeworld's orbital rings, they could not hold. The Krixis did not conquer, they consumed. Zakel exhaled through his ventral vents, the sound a whisper of defeat. There is no path to victory. Quilex hesitated, then activated a secondary projection, an old transmission, grainy by Zapirian standards, dated nearly 3 human decades past. The image resolved into a human face, young, bloodied, but defiant. A survivor of the Battle of Epsilon, Faye, one of the first skirmishes where Zapirian and human forces had crossed paths. The recording showed a Zapirian medic tending to the human's wounds, sealing ruptured flesh with bio-gel while the human's comrades lay dead around them. The human had lived. The medic had asked for nothing in return. Zakel's mandibles twitched. "Why show me this?" Quilex's voice was soft, almost reverent. "Because the humans remember." The projection shifted, more records, more encounters. A human freighter diverting course to rescue a stranded Zapirian scout. A human diplomat refusing to abandon negotiations, even as Krixis raiders burned the outer colonies. Small acts, insignificant in the grand calculus of war. Zakel's claws flexed. "You suggest we ask them for aid." The idea was absurd. The humans were fractured, their technology crude by Dominion standards. They fought with ballistic weapons and fission warheads, their ships little more than reinforced steel and desperation. Quilex's crest flared with bioluminescent emphasis. "No, I suggest we remind them of a debt." The hologram flickered one last time, resolving into a live transmission, a human warship, angular and brutal in its design, hanging in the void just beyond the system's edge. Its identification tag burned crimson in the display. UNS Vengeance. And then, without warning, the ship moved. Not with the graceful arcs of Zapirian vessels, not with the predatory slither of Krixis dreadnoughts, but with speed, raw and unchecked. Engines flaring like a star-going supernova. Zakel's spine stiffened. The humans had answered, and they had not come alone. Section Faye. The first anomaly. The UNS Vengeance cut through the void like a blade through silk, its engines burning with a fury that defied the measured elegance of Zapirian propulsion. Where Dominion ships moved with the fluid precision of crystalline currents, the human vessel lunged, its thrusters roaring in defiance of physics, of restraint, of anything but sheer, unrelenting momentum. Zakel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a millisecond, a reflexive blink against the visual assault. His command spire's luminescent panels dimmed in response to the sudden flare, the organic circuits embedded in the walls, pulsing uneasily. The Dominion had studied human vessels before, had dismissed them as crude constructs of welded steel and primitive reactors. But this was something else. The Vengeance was not a ship. It was a statement. Its hull, angular and layered with overlapping armor plates, bore the scars of countless engagements, each dent and carbon-scorched groove, a testament to battles the Dominion had never witnessed. Its prow bristled with weapon emplacements, some recognizable, like the mass drivers and plasma batteries, others twisted amalgamations of human ingenuity, their purposes inscrutable. And at its heart, pulsing like a second sun, A reactor core burned with an output that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. Quilex's voice crackled through the neural link, his bioluminescent crest flickering in time with his agitation. Their energy signature, it's not just fusion. Therese, something else woven into the reaction, something adaptive. Zapkel's claws flexed against the command console, the living crystal surface yielding slightly under the pressure. He had seen human technology before. He had understood it. This was different. The Vengeance was flanked by a swarm of smaller craft fighters, if they could be called that. They moved in erratic, unpredictable patterns, their thrusters flaring in short, violent bursts, as though the pilots inside cared nothing for fuel efficiency or optimal trajectories. They cared only for speed, for the ability to pivot on an axis and unleash hell in the span of a heartbeat. A new signature flared on the scanners. Zapkel's spine stiffened. Another human ship, and another, and another. They emerged from the dark like wolves from a forest, their silhouettes jagged and unforgiving, their formation loose yet deliberate. There was no grand armada, no perfectly synchronized fleet. Just a gathering of vessels, each distinct in design, each bearing the marks of different human factions. Some were sleek and predatory, others blocky and utilitarian, but all shared the same aura of lethality. Quilex's neural pulse spiked. The Hive brought warships from across their colonies, even the ones they were fighting each other with. Zapkel's mandibles tightened. That was the first anomaly. Humans were fractious. They warred among themselves over ideologies, over resources, over slights generations old. The Dominion's analysts had long considered it their greatest weakness, their inability to unite under a single banner. And yet here they were, not as a unified force, but as a pack. The lead ship, the Vengeance, adjusted its trajectory, its thrusters burning blue, white as it positioned itself between the Dominion's crippled spire and the approaching Krixis armada. A message flickered across the comms, unencrypted, raw, meant to be heard. You saved one of ours once. The voice was human, female, hard. We don't forget. Zapkel exhaled, the air leaving his respiratory vents in a slow, measured stream. The Krixis fleet loomed on the horizon, their organic, hull dreadnoughts writhing like serpents in the void. The humans did not wait for them to strike first. Their weapons flared to life, and the void burned. The Dominion's War Council had studied humanity for decades. They had dissected human history like surgeons, peeling back layers of flesh, every war, every betrayal, every act of savagery catalogued and analyzed. The Zapirian scholars had pored over the records with clinical precision, their crystalline data matrices humming with calculations of human volatility. Unstable, the assessment had been unanimous. Humans were a species of contradictions, capable of staggering cruelty and inexplicable kindness, of building towering civilizations only to reduce them to ash. Their greatest weakness, the Council had decided, was their inability to unite. They were predators who turned on their own kind, a flaw the Dominion had deemed fatal. Zapkel remembered the reports. The Krixis had thought the same, and now the Krixis were burning. The human fleet moved like a living thing, not with the cold precision of Dominion formations, nor the writhing organic chaos of the Krixis armada. Their ships wove through the void, like wolves circling prey, fluid, adaptive, each vessel reacting not just to orders but to the movements of the pack. Zapkel's secondary eyes flickered as tactical data streamed across his vision. The Vengeance was not alone. More human ships had emerged from the dark, their hulls scarred and patched, their weapons systems jury, rigged with a brutality that bordered on artistry. These were not fresh reinforcements. These were survivors. Warships from a dozen fractured human factions, their insignias still bearing the marks of old hatreds, Terran Confederacy, Martian Freeholds, Jovian Accord, all now moving as one. Quilex, the Dominion's chief xenologist, had once theorized that humans could only unite under existential threat. He had been right, but he had underestimated how they would unite. The Krixis dreadnoughts recoiled as the human fleet struck, not with a single coordinated volley, but with a storm of overlapping attacks, railgun slugs punching through bio-armor, plasma lances carving molten wounds, swarms of drones detonating in chain reactions that turned Krixis escorts into expanding clouds of chitinous debris. It was not elegant. It was not clean. It was a butcher's work. Zapple watched as a human destroyer, its engines crippled, deliberately rammed a Krixis carrier. The impact shattered both vessels, but not before the human ship detonated its reactor in a final act of spite. The Dominion would have called it wasteful. The humans called it payback. On the command deck of the Vengeance, Colonel Caroline Shepard exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the railing. The Dominion had saved one of hers once, a single life, plucked from a dying ship during a border skirmish they had no stake in. Humans remembered their debts, even the ones no one else thought they would. She glanced at the tactical display where the Dominion's crippled spire still hung in the void, its crystalline spires flickering with dying light. "Hold the line," she said, her voice quiet. Corporal Jackson Keller, his knuckles white around the grip of his rifle, grinned. "Wasn't planning on moving, ma'am. The Krixis would learn today. So would the Dominion. Humans didn't fight for empires. They fought for each other, and that made them far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated." Section Fae. The silent colony. The wreckage of the Dominion spire still burned. Blue-green energy flickered through its shattered crystalline lattice, like dying embers, casting jagged shadows across the Vengeance's command deck. Colonel Shepard watched the display. Her reflection fractured in the holographic feed, a human face superimposed over the ruin of an empire that had once thought itself untouchable. The Dominion had saved one life, and now humanity had saved them all. A debt repaid in fire. Shepard exhaled, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. It wasn't just victory, it was recognition. The Dominion had looked at humanity and seen a species too fractured, too emotional, too small to matter. They had not understood that humans did not fight for Dominion. They fought for the silent colonies, the forgotten outposts, the single life plucked from the void on a whim. And now, the Dominion would remember, on the surface of the crippled spire, Zapple, High Commander of the Dominion's 7th Fleet, staggered through the wreckage of his command center. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ionized crystal, the walls groaning as the structure fought against its own collapse. His carapace ached, where shards of his own ship had embedded themselves, the blue-green luminescence of his blood seeping through the cracks in his exoskeleton. He had expected death. He had deserved death. A shadow moved in the smoke. Zapple tensed, his secondary arms twitching toward the shattered remnants of his sidearm. But the figure that emerged was not Krixis. It was human. Corporal Jackson Keller stepped forward, his rifle slung across his back, his visor retracted to reveal a face smeared with soot and blood. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Dominion had saved one of theirs. Now, they had come for him. Quilex, the Dominion's chief xenologist, watched from the fractured observation deck as the human dropships descended. Their design was crude by Dominion standards, angular, inelegant, built for function over form, and yet they moved with a precision that spoke of something deeper. Coordination. The humans did not land in formation. They did not march in perfect synchronicity. They moved like a storm, chaotic, relentless, inevitable, and yet every step, every gesture was intentional. Quilex's mandibles twitched. He had studied humanity for decades. He had read their histories, their wars, their endless cycles of violence and redemption. He had thought he understood them. He had been wrong, because the humans were not here for conquest. They were here for him. Shepard's voice crackled over the comms. "Zapple, Quilex, you're coming with us." Zapple hissed, his spines flaring. "Why, the Dominion is finished. The Krixis have won." Shepard's response was quiet. "You saved one of ours. Now we save you." The words hung in the air, heavier than the wreckage around them. The Dominion had studied humanity's history. They had not studied their memory, and that, Quilex realized with dawning horror, had been their first mistake, because humans did not forget, and they did not leave their debts unpaid. The dropships ascended, leaving the silent colony behind. The Krixis would come. The war was not over. But today, humanity had reminded the galaxy of something it had long forgotten. They fought for each other, and that made them unstoppable. The dropship's interior hummed with the low, steady vibration of engines at full burn, the deck plates thrumming beneath Zackel's talons. He had expected restraints, interrogation, the cold efficiency of victors securing their prisoners. Instead, the humans had given them medical scanners, hydration packs, even a thermal blanket woven with some synthetic fiber that retained heat, like living flesh. It made no sense. Zackel's spines twitched as he studied the human soldiers moving through the bay. They moved with purpose, but not the rigid discipline of Dominion shock troops. There was something looser in their gait, something alive. Quick exchanges of nods, a murmured joke between two armored figures, the way one tilted their helmet toward another, as if sharing some unspoken understanding. Pack behavior, Quilex had whispered earlier, his voice thin with exhaustion. They move like a bonded unit, not a hierarchy. Zackel had dismissed it at the time. Now, watching them, he wasn't so sure. A shadow fell across him. Colonel Shepard stood there, her helmet retracted, revealing a face that should have been alien but carried an expression. Zackel recognized instantly, the same look his own warriors wore after a hard-fought retreat. The weight of losses not yet tallied. "You're wondering why we came for you," she said. Not a question. Zackel flexed his claws against the deck. "You owe us nothing. The one we saved was a single life. Years ago, a statistical irrelevance." Shepard exhaled, a sound almost like a laugh, but without humor. "That's not how we count." Behind her, the bay's lighting flickered, casting shifting patterns across the crystalline fragments embedded in the walls, remnants of Zapirian salvage, repurposed into human engineering. The sight sent a pang through Zackel. His people's technology broken and remade into something new. Something theirs. Quilex stirred beside him, his voice barely audible. "You studied us." Shepard's gaze didn't waver. "We remember." And then Zackel understood. The Dominion had analyzed human history, their wars, their politics, their technological progression. They had mapped out patterns of aggression, calculated response times, predicted logistical limitations, but they had not accounted for this. The humans had not come because of strategy. They had come because of a name. Lieutenant Elias Vance, a pilot shot down over a neutral zone a decade ago. A single life pulled from a burning wreck by Zapirian medics who asked for nothing in return. Unforgotten, Zackel's frills tightened against his neck. The Dominion had assumed humanity would act like every other species, weighing cost against gain, discarding sentiment in favor of logic. But the humans had broken the pattern, and now, as the dropship hurtled toward the waiting fleet, Zackel realized with cold, dawning clarity, the Krixis had made the same mistake. They had studied human wars. They had not studied human loyalty, and somewhere in the void ahead, the retaliation was already burning toward them. Section Fae. The trap at Vega, the Zapirian fleet, hung suspended in the cobalt glow of the Vega system's dying star, their crystalline hulls shimmering like shards of ice in liquid nitrogen. Commander Zackel watched the tactical display pulse with hostile signatures. The Krixis armada, a swarm of jagged black warships, had them surrounded. They had expected this. The Krixis were predators who hunted by pattern. They had studied the Zapirian retreats, their defensive formations, the way their bioluminescent shields flared under concentrated fire. Every engagement had been a lesson, every battle a data point. And now, the Krixis had herded them into a killing field. Zackel's frills rippled with suppressed tension. The Dominion High Command had ordered them to hold this system at all costs, a delaying action. Nothing more, a sacrifice to buy time for the evacuation fleets. But the humans had other plans. Quilex, the fleet's lead scientist, traced a trembling appendage over the sensor readouts. "They're tightening the net," he murmured, his voice a whisper of static. "Another 3 minutes, and their railgun batteries will have firing solutions on all our cruisers." Zackel exhaled slowly, watching the enemy formation shift. The Krixis moved with mechanical precision, their formations flawless, their tactics ruthlessly efficient. Too efficient, that was the flaw. A flicker of movement on the edge of the display caught his eye. An anomaly, a distortion in the stellar background radiation. His frills stiffened. The Krixis hadn't seen it, because they weren't looking for it, because no sane species would hide a warship in the corona of a star. The first railgun round struck the lead Krixis battleship like a god's hammer. The blackened hull crumpled inward, the impact sending a shockwave through the formation. Before the debris had even finished spinning, the second shot followed, then the third. The Krixis scrambled, their perfect formations fracturing into chaos. And then the human fleet emerged, not from the void, not from the asteroid belt, but from the star itself. The UNS Indomitable tore free from the plasma storms, its heat-blackened armor shedding molten droplets as it surged forward. Behind it, a dozen more ships followed, cruisers, destroyers, their hulls still glowing from the inferno they had endured. Zackel's mind reeled. The radiation alone should have cooked the crews alive. The heat should have melted their weapons. But the humans had done it anyway, because they had calculated the risk, because they had decided it was worth it. The Krixis fleet wheeled, their commanders barking orders, their weapons pivoting toward the new threat. The human ships fired, not with the precision of the Krixis, not with the elegance of Zapirian energy lances, but with the brutal, overwhelming force of a sledgehammer to glass. Missiles streaked out, their warheads detonating not in fire but in gravity. Space itself twisted, crushing Krixis vessels like tin cans in a fist. Railgun rounds punched through shields, through armor, through decks, through engines, each impact a declaration. "You thought you knew us? You were wrong." Quilex's voice was barely audible over the comms. They're not even targeting the engines. They're aiming for the command decks. Zackel understood. This wasn't just a battle. This was a message. The Krixis had studied human wars. They had analyzed their tactics, their weapons, their logistics, but they had never understood the why. Why humans would bury themselves in trenches for years over worthless patches of dirt. Why they would charge machine gun nests knowing they would die. Why they would hide inside a star just to ambush an enemy who had hurt their allies. The Krixis had assumed the Zapirians were alone. They had not accounted for the fact that humanity remembered. And now, as the last Krixis battleship broke apart under the Indomitable's guns, Zackel felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Something like hope. Something like awe. The humans had not come because of strategy. They had come because of a debt, and they had just rewritten the rules of war. Section Fe. The scholars doubt the Indomitable hung in the void like a blade unsheathed, its scarred hull still radiating heat from the battle. Around it, the wreckage of Krixis warships drifted in slow, glittering arcs, twisted metal and shattered crystalline armor catching the distant starlight. Inside the Zapirian flagship, Quilex stood motionless before the observation pane, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically. His talons flexed against the crystalline floor, leaving faint stress fractures in the living material. The battle had been won. The Krixis were broken. And yet, unease coiled in his thorax like a venomous serpent. He had spent cycles studying humanity, their history, their wars, their contradictions. He had read of their brutality, their capacity for destruction, their willingness to burn entire worlds for vengeance. But he had also read of their mercy, their stubborn, irrational mercy. And that was what unsettled him now. The humans had not come for territory, not for resources, not even for strategic advantage. They had come for them, for the Zapirians, for a debt so old, so insignificant in the grand calculus of the galaxy, that Krixis had almost forgotten it himself. A single life, decades ago, a Zapirian patrol had found a human escape pod adrift in the void, its occupant half dead from radiation exposure. They had taken her in, healed her, returned her to her people without demand, without expectation. A kindness, a mistake, some had argued at the time. Now, as Krixis watched the Indomitables boarding shuttles glide toward the Zapirian docking bays, he wondered if they had been right. Colonel Caroline Shepard stepped onto the Zapirian flagship, her boots clicking against the translucent deck. The air hummed with energy, the walls alive with pulsing blue-green veins of light. And yet, the sight of the Zapirian crew, their elongated forms, their faceted eyes, their trembling crests, made something in her chest tighten. They were afraid of what her ship had just done. She kept her expression neutral, her hands loose at her sides, no sudden movements, no threats. Behind her, Corporal Keller shifted, his grip tightening on his rifle before he forced himself to relax. Easy, Jackson, she thought. We're not here to fight. But she couldn't blame him for the tension. The Zapirians had seen the Indomitable in battle now. They had seen what happened to those who crossed humanity. And they were right to fear it. Zackle approached, his movements precise, controlled. His crest was raised, not in aggression, but in something closer to wary respect. Colonel Shepard, he said, his voice a resonant hum, Commander Zackle. She inclined her head. Your fleet took heavy damage. We have medical teams standing by. A flicker of surprise passed through his faceted eyes. Krixis watched from the periphery, his mind racing. Why offer aid now after the battle was won? Why show concern for the wounded when humanity had just demonstrated they could annihilate an enemy without hesitation? Unless the stories were true. Unless humans did remember. Unless they cared. The thought was more terrifying than any weapon. Because if that were the case, then the Krixis had not been wrong to fear humanity. They had simply feared the wrong thing. It wasn't human brutality that should have concerned them. It was their loyalty, Section Faye. The unlearning the medical bay of the human battleship, resolute hummed with controlled chaos. Zackle stood motionless at the threshold, his faceted eyes tracking the movements of the human medics as they worked. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone, of blood and something else, something warm, organic, alive in a way that Zapirian sterile environments never were. His wounded lay in neat rows, their crystalline carapaces cracked, their bioluminescent fluids leaking in slow, pulsing rivulets. The humans moved among them with unsettling efficiency, their gloved hands adjusting unfamiliar devices, pressing translucent gel patches over fractures, murmuring in low tones to one another. Zackle had expected indifference. At best, he had anticipated cold pragmatism, humans stabilizing the wounded only to later leverage them as bargaining chips. But this was something else. A human medic crouched beside a young Zapirian warrior, her fingers deft as she calibrated a neural stabilizer. The warrior flinched, his mandibles clicking in distress. But the human didn't recoil. Instead, she made a sound, soft, rhythmic, a hum. Zackle recognized it, not language, not even communication. Krixis stood beside him, his antennae twitching in agitation. They are treating the injuries with precision, he admitted, his voice laced with unease. But why? The battle is over. They have no tactical reason to expend resources on us. Zackle didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the far wall where a single faded emblem was displayed, a blue-green sigil, half eroded by time, the mark of the Zapirian Mercy Fleet. Decades ago, during the first expansion, a Zapirian scout vessel had stumbled upon a derelict human colony ship. its engines dead, its life support failing. The crew had been on the brink of extinction, children among them. The Zapirians had intervened, not for gain, not for leverage, because it was what they did. The act had been forgotten by most of the galaxy. The humans, it seemed, had not. Colonel Shepard approached, her boots clicking against the deck. She carried no weapon, no visible armor, just a datapad tucked under one arm. "Your people will recover," she said simply. "The plasma burns were deep, but our nanite sutures should stabilize the tissue." Zackle studied her. "You owe us nothing." Shepard's mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite. Debts aren't always about owing. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken understanding. Then, from the corner of the bay, a sound shattered the quiet. Corporal Keller was kneeling beside a Zapirian engineer, his hands pressed against the alien's chest, his voice tight. Hey, stay with me." "All right, look at me." The engineer's breathing was shallow, his bioluminescence flickering erratically. Keller didn't hesitate. He ripped open a medkit, jammed a hypospray against the Zapirian's carapace, and activated it with a sharp hiss. The Zapirian convulsed, then stilled. For one terrible second, Zackle thought it was over. Then the engineer's vents cycled, his glow steadied. Keller exhaled, his shoulders slumping. Damn, that was close. Quilex made a sound like a malfunctioning reactor. You just used a human stimulant on him. That should have killed him." Keller wiped his forehead, leaving a smear of blue-green fluid across his skin. "Yeah, probably. But I recalibrated the dosage on the fly. Figured it was worth the risk." Zackle felt something inside him shift. This wasn't just aid, this was trust. Humans didn't follow protocols. They didn't adhere to galactic medical standards. They improvised, they risked, and they did it without hesitation. Shepard watched him, her gaze unreadable. "Your scientists studied our history," she said quietly. "But history's just the beginning." Zackle understood now. The Krixis had feared humanity's capacity for destruction. They should have feared their capacity for remembering. Because humans didn't just hold grudges, they held promises. That changed everything. The observation deck of the luminous tide should have been a place of quiet contemplation, its crystalline walls refracting starlight into soothing patterns across the floor. But tonight, the light felt jagged, the silence oppressive. Zackle stood motionless before the viewport. His chitinous fingers pressed against the bio, luminescent paneling beyond the glass. The void yawned infinite and empty. The Krixis armada had vanished, not retreated, not regrouped. His secondary heart pulsed erratically, a biological alarm system honed by millennia of evolution. Something was wrong. The Krixis didn't disappear. They burned, they consumed, they left behind only scorched husks of worlds and the screams of the dying. A soft chime sounded behind him. Quilex entered, his normally vibrant bioluminescence dimmed to a sickly teal. The scientist's antennae twitched in agitation, his mandibles clicking in the rapid staccato of distress. "They're gone," Quilex said, his voice barely above a subsonic hum. "Every scout, every probe, nothing. The Krixis have left the system." Zackle's claws flexed against the panel. "They didn't leave." Quilex hesitated. Then where? A new light flickered on the edge of the viewport. Not a star, not a ship. It pulsed once, twice. A coded burst of data slicing through the silence like a knife. The luminous tide systems shivered in response, crystalline interfaces flaring as they decrypted the transmission. A single word materialized in the air between them, glowing in harsh, angular script, "Incoming." Then the stars moved. Space itself seemed to ripple, distorting like liquid under sudden pressure. One by one, shapes emerged from the darkness. Not ships, not in the way the Zapirians understood them. These were jagged silhouettes, their hulls matte, black and angular, devoid of the graceful curves and luminous energy signatures of civilized vessels. They moved without thrusters, without the telltale pulse of warp signatures. They simply were, materializing from the void as though they had always been there, waiting the ghost fleet. Quilex's bioluminescence flickered out entirely. By the first hive, he whispered. They hid them. Zackel's secondary heart stuttered. Humans didn't just remember promises, they prepared for them. Decades ago, the Zapirians had saved a single human life. Now, humanity had brought an armada to save a species, and the Krixis had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed the humans would fight fair section Fey. The last lesson, the silence on the luminous Wills Bridge, was absolute. Zackel's crystalline claws hovered over the tactical display. Frozen mid-motion, the holographic projection flickered with the signatures of the ghost fleet. Dozens of them. No hundreds scattered across the system like shards of broken night. Their profiles defied logic. No energy spikes. No warp trails. No heat signatures beyond the barest whisper of life. They were voids in space, swallowing light, swallowing sense. Quilex's tendrils coiled tight against his thorax. They cloaked them, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's failing core. Not just stealth, not just masking. They made them nothing. Zackel's secondary heart pulsed once, hard, as if trying to restart. The Krixis armada, moments ago, an unstoppable tide of crimson, hulled destroyers, had stopped. Their formations wavered, their perfect predatory advance fractured into confusion. Because the humans had not simply come to fight. They had come to haunt. On the tactical feed, the first black ship moved. No thrusters ignited, no warp field shimmered. It simply slid forward, impossibly smooth, as though the universe itself had tilted to let it pass. Then, a flicker, a distortion, and a Krixis battleship split. No flash of plasma, no detonation, just a clean surgical bisection along its spine, the two halves drifting apart in eerie silence. The debris didn't scatter, it fell, as if dragged down by unseen hands. Quilex's bioluminescence flared in jagged, panicked bursts. What was that? Zackel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the feed, on the way the black ship's hull seemed to drink the light around it. Then the comms crackled to life, a human voice. Zapirian command. This is Colonel Shepard of the UNSC Retribution. The voice was calm, almost casual. We've got your back. The Krixis reacted like a swarm of insects sensing fire. Their ships wheeled, their formations collapsing into chaos as they tried to reorient, to target the new threat. It didn't matter. The ghost fleet unfolded. Black ships darted between the Krixis lines, their movements erratic, impossible to track. One moment they were there. The next, gone, only to reappear kilometers away, already firing. Their weapons didn't glow, didn't flare. They pierced, silent and merciless, punching through shields and hulls alike. A new signal, a single, massive vessel, darker than the void behind it, sliding into the heart of the battle. The Retribution, Zackel's breath caught. It wasn't just a ship, it was a monument. Its hull was scarred, pitted with the remnants of old wars, old wounds. Its silhouette was brutal, angular, a blade forged in the fires of 100 battles, and along its flank, etched in faded but unbroken paint, was a single phrase. For those who remember, Quilex made a sound like a dying reactor. They kept it, he whispered. Zackel understood. The ship was old, older than the treaty, older than the debt. And yet, here it was, because humans didn't forget. On a bridge of the Retribution, Colonel Carisline Shepard watched the Krixis fleet scramble. Her fingers brushed the cracked screen of her console, tracing the names etched there. Old names, lost names. All batteries, she said, quiet. Fire at will. And the void burned. The Krixis had studied human history. They had learned of human wars, human brutality, human desperation, but they had missed one lesson. Humans didn't just fight for survival. They fought for debts, And today, the Krixis would learn that lesson. And in silence, Section Fey, the signal from Sol, the Retribution moved like a blade through the void, its engines burning with the same relentless fury as the humans who crewed it. The Krixis fleet, sleek and predatory in their obsidian, black warships, had expected an easy slaughter. They had not expected this. Zackle watched from the fractured bridge of the luminous will, his crystalline fingers gripping the command console as the human vessel carved through the Krixis formation. The Retribution was ancient by galactic standards, its armor pitted with centuries, old scars, its weaponry a patchwork of upgrades and jury-rigged systems. And yet, it fought with a precision that bordered on artistry. Quailex stood beside him, his bioluminescent veins flickering in erratic pulses. "They shouldn't be able to do this," he murmured. "That ship is a relic. Its technology is outdated." Zackle finished, his voice hollow. "Yes. And yet, the Retribution's railguns fired in staggered bursts, each projectile striking with surgical precision. Krixis shields flared and collapsed, their energy matrices unraveling under impacts calibrated to exploit harmonic weaknesses. The humans hadn't just studied their enemy. They had learned them. And then the signal came. It pulsed through the comm channels, raw and unfiltered, a transmission from the heart of Sol itself. No encryption, no preamble, just a voice, rough with static and something deeper, something like promise. "All remaining vessels, this is Admiral Vance of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are inbound. Hold the line." Zackle's breath caught. The Krixis had studied human history. They knew of human wars, of human stubbornness, of human rage, but they had not accounted for this, the sheer, unbroken continuity of human memory. Because the Retribution was not alone. On the edge of the system where the void bled into the dark, new signatures flared to life. Not one ship, not 10. Ancient hulls, patched and reforged. Their names etched in languages half forgotten. Vengeance, Oathkeeper, Remembrance. Ships that should have been decommissioned centuries ago, pulled from mothball fleets and dry docks. Their reactors stoked back to life by hands that refused to let go. Quailex made a sound like a failing power core. They kept all of them. Zackle didn't answer. He didn't need to. The humans had not just remembered the debt. They had preserved it, and now, at last, they had come to repay it. On the Retribution's bridge, Colonel Shepard exhaled slowly, her fingers still resting against the names on her console. "The ones who had waited. Signal the fleet," she said. "Quiet. Full assault, no quarter." The Krixis had studied human history, but they had never understood it, because history, to humans, was not just a record. It was a weapon. And now, at last, it was unsheathed. The Krixis armada hung in the void like a swarm of obsidian knives, their sleek, predatory hulls glinting with the cold light of distant stars. They had come expecting to finish what they had started, to erase the last of the Zapirian resistance, to extinguish the blue-green glow of their crystalline cities forever. They had not expected this. The human fleet did not move like a modern armada. There was no synchronized dance of thrusters, no flawless formation. These ships lumbered forward, like old warriors roused from sleep, their engines burning unevenly, their hulls scarred and patched. Some still bore the marks of ancient battles, carbon scoring from plasma fires, jagged rents where armor had been torn away and reforged. They were not beautiful. They were not efficient. They were alive. Zackle's mandibles trembled as he watched the tactical display. The Krixis had studied human warfare, their tactics, their technology, their predictable patterns of attack. But they had not accounted for this, for ships that should have been scrap, for crews that should have been dust, for the weight of a debt unpaid. On the bridge of the Retribution, Colonel Shepard stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the enemy formation. The names on her console pulsed softly, hundreds of them, a litany of the lost. She did not need to speak. The ship itself seemed to hum with anticipation, its ancient reactors groaning as they fed power to weapons that had not fired in centuries. "Fire control," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Retribution's main battery, a relic of a bygone era, a weapon so massive it had been deemed impractical by modern standards, lit up with a sound like thunder trapped in steel. The Krixis had shields, they had point defense systems, they had every advantage of technology and numbers. None of it mattered. The first shot tore through their lead battleship like paper, the kinetic impact rippling outward in a shockwave of shattered hull plating and venting atmosphere. Secondary explosions bloomed along its spine as internal systems failed catastrophically, the ship folding in on itself like a dying beast. The human fleet did not wait for a response. They charged, not in formation, not with precision, like wolves. The Oathkeeper rammed a Krixis cruiser head, on its reinforced prow smashing through the enemy's shields as if they weren't even there. Boarding pods erupted from its flanks, spilling armored figures into the breach. Soldiers in outdated power armor, their weapons crude by galactic standards, their faces hidden behind visors etched with old unit insignia. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like vengeance. Quilex watched, his crystalline carapace flickering with disbelief. They're boarding them in this era. Zackle said nothing. He didn't need to. The Krixis had studied human history, but they had never understood the most important lesson of all. Humans did not forget, and they did not forgive. The battle was not a contest of technology. It was not a test of tactics. It was a reckoning. And when the last Krixis ship broke apart, its hull collapsing under the weight of its own failures, the human fleet did not cheer. They simply turned, as one, toward the Zapirian homeworld, toward the ones they had come to save. Colonel Shepard exhaled, her fingers brushing the names on her console one last time. "Debts paid," she murmured, "and the dead, at last, could rest."